Okay, welcome back to the Hype Mind. I'm Bear. I'm here with Daniel, and we're talking about abuse versus blame. And this is one. I really want to talk about this with Daniel because Daniel, I don't know, knows how to love themselves better than Daniel does. I mean, he's got the key information that you need to know when it comes to loving yourself. Um, but the first thing to understand that's super important when it comes to whether or not you have been an abusive individual or whether or not you're being blamed, which I think is a very common dynamic men find themselves in, is that's exactly what I want to tell you about. It's actually a state of cognitive fusion, which is something I became familiar with recently. Cognitive fusion is when you have a hard time separating your thoughts from yourself and you think that you are your thoughts. You think that because you're thinking something about yourself, it's true about yourself, which isn't necessarily true. And and it's only after you're able to cognitively defuse that you're able to realize you aren't your thoughts, and you're able to see this situation in a much clearer, truer matter, right? Because men and the masculine comes off in a certain way, and sometimes that looks abusive and sometimes it is abusive. Sometimes you are being an abusive person, but sometimes you're simply being blamed for being abusive. And you see this in mostly in relationship dynamics with intimate partners, but I think you also see it in relationships with family. I mean, I can certainly say sibling wise, I've seen the my sisters be like, "Oh, you're being abusive," and I'm like, "No, I'm just being a man." And that's
Mhm.
where you have to be able to separate your thoughts from who you really are and not associate yourself with that, and then have that those steps to self-love to be able to identify, with the blame and separate yourself from the blame, or understand if you really do, you really are guilty of something.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. It's all about perspective. It's like you can see it one way, the other person see it another way, and then someone outside of you can give you a whole new perspective, and you're like, "Holy crap, I
Yeah.
didn't think of it like that."
And a
Um,
lot of times everybody outside of you sees it in the same way as someone else, sees it. And so you're it's you against the world in some understandings of the
yeah,
situation.
can you give a
Right.
couple
But
examples?
yeah, I think so. But it really comes down to being able to understand, like you said, the perspective portion of it, and then realize, just just come clear with yourself on your perspective of the situation, right? Really step out and look down and say, okay, I get that this is someone else is saying something, but what's the reality for me? How am I showing up? Am I doing this or that? Right. So let me think about this for a sec. So in relationships, I've been told that oh, you're a manipulative person, right?
Mhm.
So, and a lot of times people associate that with abuse. And then there's you could go to a physical level. There's plenty of uh times I've heard people be like, oh yeah, you're not to me, but there's plenty of scenarios where people are like, you're an abusive person. My boyfriend's an abusive person because he physically takes the children by their hand to their room, and that's just too physically aggressive, and that's borderline abusive and stuff like that. um and so that's where the blame starts coming out, is you are being blamed for being abusive, and you're sitting here going, am I abusive, or is someone just blaming me for something, for their own perspective of the situation?
Right, and then
And then as
since
far as with, let me think about this for a minute. My sister my sister's definitely called me abusive. If I'm like physically working on something and doing it my way, she's like, no, don't do that. And I keep doing it. She's like, you can't touch me. It's like, I own that thing. You touch that thing too. You can't touch something and then, so it really is perspective. But a lot of times we get
Mhm.
caught up in that cognitive fusion of sitting here going, what? Am I abusive because we were both touching the same object and I was stronger or more aggressive, because I'm a man. I'm a man, and you guys are
Well,
men
yeah.
out there too.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it's all about perspective there because it's like you could, she could say, "Oh, you're abusing me," and you're just like, "I'm just taking what's mine.
Right. Right.
I'm not abusing you. This
And
is
and
different."
unfortunately I'm stronger than you. In most cases, you're going to be stronger than the women in these situations. Women are naturally the physically weaker sex. It's just a reality. Not all women. I know women who I wouldn't want to arm wrestle with, but that's like that's like a half out of 10 women. Like, so, so I'm talking about this because I think there's a lot of men who struggle to own that masculine portion of themselves because they're always being blamed for being abusive when they're not actually being abusive. Well, sometimes you are. Sometimes, and this is where you have to be able to diffuse it, but you're not always being abusive. Sometimes you're just being yourself. You're just being your masculine person that you are. And to the feminine or to feminine men or to weak men, that looks abusive. And a lot of times that looks abusive because it really tugs on the heartstrings of something painful for them where they've been made to feel weak in the past. But
Mhm.
or where they are actually weak. If you're physically stronger than someone, it's gonna make a woman uncomfortable if she's physically weaker than you. You know, but
Right, and that doesn't change the meaning behind, say, what you're doing or your intentions.
right,
Like, it just in the culture, and we see this just like with abusive. There's so much judgment around these words. These are like buzzwords. They're
that's why we're talking about it.
words that stick out and that people have a lot of judgment over, like abusive, maybe like toxic.
Yeah,
And there's plenty of
masculine.
others where, yeah, where people will look at it, and even men will say, "Holy crap! Like, I don't want to be that. Like, I don't want to be abusive." And they know they don't want to be abusive, and then they question themselves, "Well, am I abusive?" And it starts to become
Well, what? Yeah, what is abusive?
yeah, it starts to become a like inner it starts to have some inner conflict in yourself, and
And
yeah, and then you start to question yourself. Well, am I a good person? I don't want to come across this way. And that's the thing too. It's like
you're worried about
be
image.
yeah, then you're worried about image, then you're worried about, well, how do other people see me? And it's like other people could see you however
Yeah, how do other
they
people judge
like,
me?
yeah, and
Right.
however they choose. And so that's something you can't control, and worrying about that can be a waste.
Well,
Um,
and that's where the emphasis needs to be placed is once you start getting in your head about it, because that's when the cognitive fusion starts to happen and where you need to really intervene and, properly using proper wordage, defuse it, right? That's where you really need to distinguish you from what you're thinking and say, I'm thinking about all this. I'm thinking I might be abusive. I'm thinking I'm also feeling like a victim and I'm being blamed. I'm thinking that I'm also a strong man. I'm thinking that I want to be masculine, right? And you need to actually separate from that and say, some of these are thoughts, some of these are realities. Here's the realities, here's the thoughts. Because that's where this gets really ugly, is it ends up becoming about self, which you're always really good at talking about. And so it becomes, because it is about you. This is a scenario where you want to make sure you're being the person you want to be, and maybe you are being abusive, but maybe you're not, and maybe you're just being a man, acting
yes,
like a man.
yes, and I want to lay this perspective down too, because I think this is critical to think about, is that everything, and this is what I believe too, everything there's a good to it, and it can be twisted for evil.
Right.
For
Yeah.
example, being abusive, it's like sometimes being abusive is necessary. Like, you're getting attacked by a wild animal, you better abuse that animal so it doesn't continue to attack and hurt you. So it's like these can be twisted in different ways.
But and see, that's the funny thing, is that's not even abuse, that's defense.
Right,
But
exactly.
yes, the
Well,
defense
yeah.
has to take the form of physical, um physical, I wouldn't even say aggression, physical contact that is damaging, but not abusive.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
damaging,
that's it.
but to damage and abuse are two different things.
But someone might call it abusive.
Right,
You're
right,
abusing an
yeah,
animal. And so you have to be able to, by yourself, distinct what your intention is and what
right.
the meaning is behind
And
that.
hold true to that.
Exactly, without worrying about, oh, they think it's abusive. It does
So
it mean I'm being abusive? Yeah. So it's really all about actually having um your own or knowing your true intentions
yeah, you were talking
and
about
judging yourself
stories and
instead of
examples.
allowing someone else and their verbiage to judge you.
Right. Yeah, separating yourself and holding true to you. And yeah, you're talking about examples, and this makes me think of that story of the little girl in the park, the dad who takes his daughter for a walk in the park, right?
Yeah.
And so from one perspective, well, solely in regards to himself, he could be doing it because he loves his daughter and wants to take her for a walk in the park and get her fresh air and practice good health and whatnot. From the other perspective, he could be doing it to get attention because his daughter's cute and he wants people to look and say, wow, you have a lovely daughter. And so he might use it for uh, a
Attention.
validating
Yeah.
purpose
Oh,
when he's not, when he should be looking for that in himself. um, and then of course people could have two perspectives. They could say, look, there's a father taking his beautiful little girl for a walk in the park uh, because he loves her, or they could say, wow, there's a father who's just trying to show off his daughter. um,
mhm.
you know and that's just not something you can control. If someone wants to think that, they could be thinking that because they wish they had had children themselves and they messed up and it's too late now. Or in
Mhm.
their mind, it's too late, maybe. But that's all their problem and their thoughts. You have to get real with yourself and reflect on yourself and saying, why am I doing this? And sometimes I found this situation myself. I had a beautiful dog and I would take him for walks because he needed to walk. He was a hyper dog. He had a lot of energy. He wanted to go outside, and he didn't just want to go outside. He wanted to move when he was outside. Right. And so I would go on walks with him. Right. And on the walk, I would sit there and I'd think, damn, am I doing this for attention? Right. So I'd experienced cognitive fusion. I would say, I thought I was doing this for good, but now I think I might be doing this for bad. And I'd really just have to separate that and say, that's just a thought. I just had a thought that I might be taking my beautiful dog for a walk to get attention, when really I know I'm not. Like, it's just a passing thought that's going to be gone in 2 seconds. I'm taking my dog out because I like walking and he loves walking, and it's a nice day and he wants to be outside and it's good for his health. And that's what being responsible, in my opinion, looks like, is exercising your dog and not neglecting him or abusing him. Um, and so that's it. It's you have to be able to focus on yourself and really look at your thoughts as a third party person and say, some of these are going to be true. Some of these are just going to be thoughts that are just passing through my head. Right.
Mhm.
And to do the same thing with abuse, you're being blamed for being abusive. You have to look at it and you have to say, is this the person I want to be? Is this how I actually think I'm showing up?
Right.
You might just be being a man. That's the reality, is you might just be a dude.
Yeah.
It's like,
And you have so much power. Like you can convince yourself pretty much of anything. You can convince yourself that you're abusive. You can convince yourself that you're not abusive. So you really have to you really have to be able to work through that and realize
be
that. I'll
authentic.
give
Yeah,
you
because
a story too,
the
actually.
goal is not to convince yourself that you're not wrong when you are.
Right. Yeah. That. But I want to share a story here. Well, I was responding to a call as I'm on an ambulance and you go to different people's houses, apartments, whatever. And I was in this apartment building and I'm looking for this room number that I'm supposed to respond to, and this gentleman's there, and he asked me, "Where are we going?" And so I was pretty confident I knew where I was going, so I didn't help. And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, "Oh, I don't need." And I like to give people privacy because some people don't like their neighbors knowing that they're going to the hospital or something's wrong. So I go,
Yeah.
"None of your business." In the nicest way I could say it. And he gets really mad. He's like, I was just trying to be nice, blah blah blah. And I'm like, dude, it's not what I meant at all.
Right.
It was
Right.
not to be mean.
You're like, so was
But
I. I was just trying to be nice too.
yeah. And and I told him that, so he heard me say that, right? He knew my intention. I was able to share my intention, and he goes, and he's still like, well, that's not what it sounded like.
Yeah.
And he just took it the way that he wanted to take it, and that was in a way that wasn't,
Impacted him
yeah, that
negatively.
impacted him and made him, angry, and he was just sitting there in his own anger, and I was busy doing my job. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's like this same thing. It's like it's how you want to view it, how your perspective. You can control that too. And like Andrew said, you don't want to try to convince yourself of something wrong too, because you have the power to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I mean, this subject is here because I think a lot of guys get guilted into this. They get called abusive, they get called names, and sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's true on a subconscious level. So it's not not your fault, so to speak, right? It's something worthy of forgiveness for. I mean, it's even if you did it on purpose on a conscious level, it's still worthy of forgiveness. But if you are being abusive verbally in a manipulative manner or something, right? Or maybe you are a physically aggressive individual and you learned it from your parents and it's subconscious, don't beat yourself up. Now it's something you can become aware of and work through. But I just think there's a lot of men who experience this and and yeah, don't beat yourself up over that either. Like people are gonna have their perspectives, they're gonna have judgments. It's your job to know yourself and to love yourself and to be able to look at your thoughts and say these are true, these are false. I know I'm not abusive. I know I acted, out of my self-defense or out of my best self or whatever, right? And yes, I know I acted in a way that was very masculine that intimidates people who aren't masculine.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. Oh,
maybe you go
and
for a handshake. Someone could think that's abusive. You were roughly shaking my arm.
uh-huh.
Like I love handshaking, but some people they don't want you to touch them. COVID or whatever, like that's just disrespectful, right? So they might not even say abuse, but I think abuse is one of the most common ones you hear people throw out there, like it's a weightless word that
Yeah.
and so if you're a man, this might just be you being a man, and that's okay. If nobody else is going to tell you that, we're going to tell you it's okay to be a man, even if people think you're being abusive.
Yeah, you bring a
So,
great point about that because in a culture that doesn't that rejects
yeah,
anything that has to do with like strength,
strength or
masculinity,
masculinity, not even strength, just masculinity.
it's men will feel like they are evil when it's just innate in their nature to want to just express in a different way, not to go out and to harm others, but to be them.
Right. And actually, that's interesting because in general, the masculine, I think, is very physical. I mean, we like to,
Oh yeah.
I know as a
It-
man, I like to tussle. I like to shake people's hands. You know, I like to give people hugs. I love, like if you're a pretty girl and I'm dating you, I want to kiss you. Like I'm a physically expressive person. But if you're someone who's not comfortable with who you are, or you're a very feminine person, that might come off as very aggressive, even though it's not. It's just masculine. It comes off as very masculine, but not if you don't understand that. So, but
just
hey,
energetic.
yeah, yeah. Life force,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
penetration, as Coach Corey would say. The
All right.
masculine wants to penetrate. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Peace.
Like, because I know you liked it.